This conference will now be recorded.
Good. Okay. So the Parsha this week, good morning, Linda, is Parsha Shmini. And what I wanted to discuss this morning as it relates to the Parsha is the idea of, we have lots of different terms. We say this person is religious, or we say this person is observant, or we say this person is spiritual, right? Lots of different terms that we use. And we often use them interchangeably, but I don't think they are really interchangeable at all. And there is some overlapping at times, other times there isn't. And I think it's a worthwhile avenue to explore. Okay? But as we get there, let's first get to that point. So Parshat Shmini is actually a classic example of a concept that we've discussed often. And that is, the Torah is not a history book. It doesn't go, we start with creation, and then we work through Bereshit, and then Shmot, and then Vayikra. There's a lot of doubling back, overlapping, because it's not one Torah, it's Chamisha Chumshe Torah. There are the 5 Chumashim, which comes from the word Chamesh, 5. There are the 5 Chumashim of the Torah. And as Ramban explains, each one is serving a different role. Each one is telling a different story. And therefore, there will be some overlap that happens. As we've mentioned before, Bereshit, Ramban says, is the book of creation, both the physical creation of the world. It's not a physics book. It gives about 20 psukim for that. And then the moral foundations of the world that were laid down by the patriarchs and matriarchs. And it goes through until the death of Yosef, because the death of Yosef is the end of that period. Yosef was in certain ways like a patriarch, and in other ways like the Shvatim, like the tribes. On one hand, he's one of the 12 sons of Jacob, but he also had 2 tribes. His sons, Menashe and Ephraim, had the status of tribes also. So therefore, when we're not counting Levi, then we count his 2. See, he is the transition between the generations. So that's where Bereshit ended, with the death of Yosef. Now, well back before the end of Bereshit, though, before the end of Genesis, we had the brothers going down to Egypt. That was all part of the patriarchs and Joseph's story. So well back chapters before the end of Bereshit, we went down to Egypt. Shmot, the next book, Exodus, begins with, and these are the names of the children of Israel who went down to Egypt. We know that already. Why are we reiterating that? Because this is a different book with a different theme and a different purpose. This Exodus, Shmot, is the book of exile and redemption. And therefore, it needs to begin with the start of the exile. What was the start of the exile? When Jacob and his children came down to Joseph in Egypt, in Mitzrayim. So therefore, we're starting with that point, which was actually chapters back from the end of the first book, because that was the book of creation and the foundations of the Avot, of the patriarchs and matriarchs, including Joseph, which included they going down to Egypt. And now they're going down to Egypt in the book of exile and redemption. How did the book of exile and redemption end? With redemption. And we've discussed before, redemption is not the giving of the Torah. That's only in the middle, in Yitro. It's not the exodus from Egypt. That was even before. That's in Bishalach. It's not the entering the land of Israel. That's not going to happen until we finish the entire Torah with the death of Moshe and Joshua, Yehoshua, in the Navi and the prophets. is the one who'll bring us into the land of Israel. So what is that redemption? The book of Exile and Redemption, what is that redemption? So on page 540, for those of us who have the stone Chumash, and Liddell, I apologize, I should have given you yesterday when you came, Liddell, I should have given you one of these Chumashim also. But if you're on Sefaria, so then it's the book of Exodus, chapter 40, verse 34, page 540 in our stone Chumash. What's happening over there?
I have one.
Oh, you have a stone Chumash? Perfect.
Yes.
Perfect. Good. Page 540. Vayichas ha'anan, verse 34. And the cloud covered the Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting, and the glory of God filled the Mishkan. And Moshe was not able to enter that Ohel Moed because the cloud was so overwhelming there. That is the end of Shemot. That is the end of the book of Exile and Redemption. What is the stage of redemption that we reached? That close connection, that tangible essence of God's presence being felt, being available, being there before us. That is the ultimate redemption. Okay. Now, just like we doubled back towards the back end of Bereshit, and we had our going down to Egypt. Right? Now, if you'll turn back to page, no, I have it wrong. Turn back. Oh, I got it right. No, I have it wrong. Turn back 1 second, my friends. There we go. Page 536. Chapter 40, verse 1. Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, B'yom hachodesh harishon be'echad lachodesh. On the first month, on the first day of that month. This is, of course, is the second year, right, when we left Egypt. Takim et Mishkan Ohel Moed. You shall establish the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and place everything there that needs to be there. Turn to page 538, and there, verse 17, that's where it happens. Vayihi, and it was in the first month, b'chodesh harishon b'shana hashenit, in the second year, be'echad l'chodesh, on the first day of the month, hukam ha-mishkan, the Mishkan was established. And Moshe did all the things that he did in putting it all together, and then it follows 540 with the God's presence filling the Mishkan. Beautiful. With that, we're ready for the third book of the Torah, of Vayikra, Leviticus. What is the third book of the Torah all about? It is that which, it's all about Kedusha, holiness. Holiness of the place, all that took place in the Mishkan. Holiness of time, the holidays. Holiness of the person, purity, impurity. This is the book of holiness. And it begins with Moshe instructing everyone in terms of all of the laws of the sacrifices, which we need to know. How are they all going to be done? Now let's go to page 588, our Parsha. And we begin, Vayihi Bayom HaShmini. And it was on the 8th day. What is that 8th day? Rashi explains this is the 8th day of the consecration of the Mishkan. For 7 days, Moshe had been building, constructing, and deconstructing. Constructing and deconstructing. And then on the 8th day, Rashi says this was Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the first of the month of Nisan. What we just saw over there, back in Shemot, this is the whole story of that, of God's cloud filling, etc., of the beginning of the Mishkan. And Kara Moshe summoned Aaron and his sons and the elders. And he said to Aaron, Kach lecha egel. Take an egel as a sacrifice. Ooh, wow. That was difficult for Aaron to do. That egel was a very stark reminder, that calf, of his sin, of the golden calf. Take that as a chatat, as a sin offering. And verse 3, to the children of Israel, he said, Kichu, take seir izim lechatat. Take goats, seir izim lechatat. Take a he-goat for a sin offering. Ooh, that also brings back some very uncomfortable memories for us. What are the uncomfortable memories that we have associated with a goat?
The golden calf.
No, that was a calf. That was Aaron. But what do we have? The children of Israel with the goat.
That was with Yosef's coat and the brothers.
Yeah. That was the sale of Yosef. We had a long history with the goat, right? That was, culminating, we'll say, with Yosef being sold to Egypt and the deception of the father, right? So that's what we need to bring as a chatat, which I think is a very, very powerful message. So we need to. We can't sweep things under the carpet. We have to move on, but we have to overcome and move on. We don't ignore and move on. We don't act as if it never happened and move on, but rather we need to confront our errors, our missteps, and then we're able to move on. So therefore, Aaron needed to bring an egel, a calf, as his chatat, as his sin offering. And we needed to bring the seir, the goat, as our sin offering. And then we can move on. We have to acknowledge. We have to realize. And then move on. Pasuk 7. Vayomer Moshe Aaron. Moshe said to Aaron, Krabel HaMizbeach. Come to the Mizbeach. Aaron needed some coaxing. Rashi explains that he was bosh. He was embarrassed. He was afraid to come. Until Moshe said to him, Lekach nivcharta. This is what you've been chosen to do. Right? You've got to overcome this and come forward. This is the role that you need to play. So we see other very, very important layers to this. We have to confront it, right? But we're not proud of it. We don't wave it. We don't write a paperback, right? In order to become rich and famous, right? Telling the world about all of our indiscretion. There needs to be a sense of humility, of being somewhat contrite. And at the same time, lekach nivcharta. This is what you've been chosen for. And you have to step up. And you have to do it. I can't tell you how many friends of mine who are also rabbis, and we share the same feelings. Like, who are we kidding? Right? We're the rabbis. Right? We're the rabbis of the community. But you have to step up. Yeah, l'kach nivcharta. If that's the role that you've been chosen to play, you take a deep breath and you step forward and you do it. L'kach nivchart. And they did everything that they were supposed to do. And we turn to page 590. And they're bringing all the sacrifices. They're doing everything as they're supposed to do. Excuse me, sorry. It's taking us through 590, doing everything. And then, verse 22, Aaron lifted up his hands to the nation, and he blessed them. And he came down then from doing the chatat and the ola and the shlom and the different sacrifices. But, as we see from verse 23, what was supposed to happen at verse 22 didn't seem to happen. Aaron needed to call in the reserves. Vayavo Moshe v'Aaron el Oel Moed. Now Moshe and Aaron had to go to the Oel Moed. And Rashi asks, what's the backstory over here? Why did Moshe enter over here? And Rashi brings Aaron, his second explanation. Aaron had brought all the sacrifices, and the Shechina, the divine presence, had not yet come down. And he was anguished. And he said to Moshe, I know that God's angry with me. And that's why the Shechina, the presence, does not come down. And he said, Moshe, my brother, you've humiliated me. You brought me in, v'nit bayashti. And now I'm completely embarrassed, completely humiliated. Immediately what happened? 23, Moshe and Aaron. Moshe accompanied Aaron into the Oel Moed. And they dive into Hashem, who bikshu racham, and they asked God for compassion. And then the Shechina came down. Vayetzu, they went out, vayavarchu et ha'am, and they blessed the nation. Vayera kavod Hashem al kol ha'am. And the honor of God was then appeared to all the people. The divine presence came down. Vatetze Eish, an amazing, amazing vision they all had. Fire came down from the heavens, and it consumed on the altar all that had been placed there. God was accepting their offering. Vayar kol ha'am. And the whole nation experienced this incredible vision. Vayeronu. And they called out, Shavachu, the Targum says, and they cried out these praises to God. Vayiplu al Paneim, and they fell down onto their faces. This is the culmination of 210 years of slavery, of 400 years since the birth of Isaac, of Abraham's Lech Lecha, go forward, leave the idolatry of Terach, your father, behind. This is the culmination. This is the Geula. This is the redemption that the book of Exile and Redemption spoke about. God's presence coming down to the world in this, not a one-time Mount Sinai, but a consistent, tangible presence. This is the zenith. This is the peak. This is the top. And then what happens? We literally turn the page to page 592. Vayikhu v'nei Aaron, Nadav Avihu. The sons of Aaron, Nadav and Avihu, took ish machtato. Each took his fire pan. Vayitnu v'hen eish, and put fire into it. V'yasimu aleh ketoret, and placed upon it the ketoret, incense. V'yakrivu l'fnei Hashem eish zara, and they brought close before God this eish zara, this foreign flame, asher lo tziva otam, that they were not commanded to bring. And the repercussion was immediate. V'teitze eish milifnei Hashem, fire came out from before God, v'tochel otam, and consumed them. V'yamutu lifnei Hashem, and they died. Wow. Talk about spoiling a party, huh? Talk about ruining a moment. What is going on over here? What were Nadav and Avihu thinking? What did they do wrong? So terribly wrong. And the verses are very, very nondescript. All it says is they brought a foreign flame inside. Our sages say they were drunk. Our sages say they were waiting for Moshe and Aaron to die so they could take over. Our sages say they were Mora Halacha B'fnei Rabban. They took their own initiative and didn't check if their decision, if their halachic decision, they didn't ask their mentors, their Rabbanan, they didn't ask Moshe and Aaron. They acted on their own. But what is going on here? And this, I think, leads us into the idea of, is the person religious? Is the person observant? Is the person spiritual? We have many, many different terms that we use. Very often we say, oh, is the person religious? So say, are they Shomer Shabbos? That's, but it's very interesting because I've met people, I know people who are observant, but I wouldn't call them spiritual. They might be observant, but they, and I think everyone struggles with this, go through the motions, or at times go through the motions, but are not, you could almost be doing all these mitzvot and say, God, what does God have to do with this? I have to make sure I eat enough matzah, leaning the proper way, the proper amount, within the proper amount of time. What does God have to do with this? I'm focused on my matzah now. and it's a danger. It's a danger that we can become so focused on the observance that we're leaving God out of the picture. I've shared before a very fine fellow who was going through a conversion process. And he was very, 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 came to me one night so upset that he was in a managerial position, people working for him, and the people working for him weren't doing their job properly. And he slammed them, he drove them into the ground. And afterwards he felt so terrible. And he said, Rabbi, what am I doing over here? Here I'm being so careful about this mitzvah and that mitzvah. And that's how I treat these people. And I said to him, 100% right. You're missing the point. All the mitzvot are meant to give us this God awareness, this constant God awareness. And that needs to spill over into all of my interactions with everyone and everything. And the mitzvah that I do, which gives me the God awareness, now when I have to deal with these people working for me who are not doing their job properly, I need to relate to them as children of God. as people in the image of God. I need to relate to them. How would I want to be related to if our positions were changed? I might need to let them go. I might need to fire them. But how can I do that in a way that they'll be able to pick themselves up and go on to another position and not feel worthless and not get depressed and go down that rabbit hole? So we can have people who are observant, who are not very spiritual. We could have people who are very spiritual, but not observant. They're very, very fine, uplifted people. They're always trying to do good. They're very, very spiritual. They're very in tune with God, but they might not be observant. We have all these different terms that often overlap, often don't overlap. And let's try to see where we need to get to. So let's see a little bit of a backstory of who are Nadav and Avihu. Where else have we had Nadav and Avihu? And if you come back to
Rabbi, can you say again the last place where you read it about Nadav and Avihu? Where is it written?
590. Okay, so in Shmini on page 592, that's where we have Nadav and Avihu bringing the strange fire.
Yeah.
Where else do we find Nadav and Avihu? That's back on page 440. Shemot Perek Chaf Dalet. Let's see verse 1, page 440. Ve'el Moshe Amar. And to Moshe, God said, Alei El Hashem. Ascend to Hashem. Ata, you. V'Aaron and Aaron. Nadav. V'Avihu. V'Shivim Miziknei Yisrael. And 70 of the elders of Israel. V'Hishtachavita Merachok. This is Mount Sinai. They're climbing Mount Sinai. And they will all bow Merachok from a distance. V'nigash Moshe levado el Hashem. V'hem lo yigashu. Moshe himself will enter into that cloud to come to Hashem. They will not. Va'am lo ya'alu imo. And the nation will not go up at all. So we have different gradations of who is going up how far on Mount Sinai. Look down on that same page, 440, the last verse, or second line from the bottom, verse 9. Vayal Moshe. So that was the command. And now, Vayal Moshe, Moshe ascended. Va'aron and Aaron, and Nadav and Avihu, V'shivim miziknei Yisrael. You have Moshe and Aaron and 70 elders, and you have the next gen, as it's often called. Who's the next gen of Jewish leaders? Nadav and Avihu. They also went up. Vayiru, 8 Elokei Yisrael. And they had a vision of the God of Israel, page 442. V'tachat raglav kamase livnat hasapir, uche'etzem hashamayim latohar. Whatever this means, right? When the Gemara tells us of those who entered Pardes, those who went up to the highest levels of spiritual heights, right? And one died, one went crazy, one became a heretic, and Rabbi Akiva came out okay, right? This is the type of vision that they had that was just, whoa, mind-blowing, we would say. Under his feet was the likeness of sapphire brickwork, and it was like the essence of the heaven in purity. What does that mean? I have no idea. We have no idea. There are no words in our vocabulary to describe what they saw, and that's as close as we can get. And the way the Targum understands, they saw this clarity, and they rejoiced, as if they were eating and drinking. That's how they were soaking in, right? Moshe spent 40 days, he didn't eat and drink. He was taking in this spirituality, and that was keeping him going. They ate and they drank. This was like eating and drinking. They were sated with this incredible vision, but they did not enter into the Anan. They did not enter into the cloud. They were back. They were held back. Let's come back to where we are on page 592. We discussed before, a couple of weeks ago, the constant connection that we have between Shabbat and Mishkan. All of the 39 major malachot, the creative activities, and on Shabbat, we, just like God stopped creating on the seventh day, comes our Shabbat, we refrain from creative activities, and rather we bask in the glory of the world that Hashem has created. And how do we define those creative activities? That which went into the building of the Mishkan. Because we discussed this reciprocity almost of this Mishkan. And the reciprocity of the Mishkan was God created, God carved out in his world. He created a halal, a space for us wherein we could exist. We who exist within space, within time. That is the world that he carved out in his great world. He carved out a little space for us that we know as the universe, right? We call God Makom, the place. And it's not that God is in the world. The world is in God's space, God's place. And in that world that he created for us, he reserved a little area for himself. And that was Gan Eden. That was the Garden of Eden, where Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve, were guests and needed to follow the parameters there. In our world, we reciprocated. We created a space in our world for God. We mentioned before the famous medrash of the king who gives away the daughter and says to the son-in-law, I want you to make a little room for me where I can come visit and feel comfortable and spend time with you and with my lovely daughter. That is the Mishkan that we created. In the world that God created for us, we reciprocated and created a place, a space for God, which doesn't work according to our physical space, time. We mentioned the Aron, the sages tell us, the ark stood miraculously. It was there. We know the dimensions. We had it back in Parsha Teruma. We had the dimensions, 2.5 by 1.5 by 1.5. Yet, when it's in a room that's 10 by 10, and you measure from this end to the wall and that end to the wall, it's 5 and 5. So it's taking up space, it's not taking up space. It's in that place where heaven and earth meet, where the world, the realm of time and space, touches the realm of beyond time and beyond space. And that's why in that Mishkan, in the Beit HaMikdash, we have all these different rules and parameters that don't Tumah, Tara, impurity, purity, Kedusha, holiness. It's a whole different realm. That is a realm with God's rules, God's parameters that we created for him. So God created space for us, creation of the world, Shabbat. We create space for him, Mishkan. And that is the constant interplay that we have. Whenever Shabbat is mentioned, Mishkan is mentioned. They're always mentioned one next to the other. And we've mentioned before, what was the great sin in the Garden of Eden? Eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil? It was understanding the boundaries. All right, we always say, I invite you to my house, you're more than welcome to come. You start opening the drawers, you start going into the different bedrooms. That's not really what you're in my house. In the Garden of Eden, right, God said, don't eat from the Eitz Hadat. He doesn't want them to eat, so don't put it there. No. He wants them to not eat and know that they are in God's place over there. And we mentioned all the laws of kashrut are all about that. The laws of kosher are which is also in this week's Parsha, actually. This week's Parsha, well, right, interesting how that interplays what we're discussing now. It then goes on to the laws of kashrut. Kashrut is recognizing the boundaries. We're in God's world. He says, as my grandmother would say to me, Essen, mein Kind, Essen, eat, my child, eat, but there are restrictions. Realize, remember, you're in my world. That is how our kashrut is a constant fix for the sin there. It's recognizing the boundaries. Now, here are Nadav and Avihu. Here's their chance. Back over there in Parsha Mishpatim by Mount Sinai, they came up short. So close, yet so far. They only got to see it from a distance. And now they are in the midst of this incredible spiritual experience. The fire came down from the heavens. This is the height of spirituality. But it cannot be unbridled. It's not a free-for-all. Spirituality needs to be connecting to that which is eternal, connecting to God. And that needs to be according to the parameters that God set forth. This was a re-entering of the Garden of Eden and doing as I see fit. My self-expression, this is how I think I will be spiritual. This is my spirituality. I'm going to bring a fire. God's fire came down. I'm going to bring a fire. My fire, God's fire. I merge. I couldn't merge by Mount Sinai. Now I'm going to merge according to the way that I want to do it. In any relationship, it's not what you want. It's not what you would enjoy. It's not how you would want it. In any meaningful relationship, it's not about you. It's about what is it that the other one wants. What does the other one want to do? What does the other one enjoy? It's not I dictate. And here, they had their unbridled spirituality, which went right against observance. It was their own expression. Let me do what feels right to me. And we know how dangerous that can be. You look at ISIS, when you look at a distorted spirituality, beheading people because that's their spirituality. You have so many examples of unbridled spirituality, which becomes horrific, horrendous. So if we're starting now in the Mishkan, rule number one, cardinal rule number one, capital rule number one is it's not a free-for-all. It's not freestyle. It's not whatever it is you want to do. There are parameters. If you want to get close to God, you have to follow the rules, the parameters, the pathway, the roadmap that God gives. Otherwise, you're flailing around, but not getting anywhere. Not only not getting anywhere, but misleading. Had this been allowed, then this would have set the stage. The Mishkan is a place for whatever you want to do. And
Rabbi, can I?
just one second.
Sure.
There's a beautiful article. Gosh,
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm just missing his name right now. From the OU. He'll come back to me in a moment. Who was talking to someone who was in recovery from addiction. And he was comparing the drugs. That's a way to have a high, a spiritual, out-of-body high. Right? According to the sages, they came in intoxicated. Maybe intoxicated means literally having drank, or maybe intoxicated means that they were intoxicated from this whole experience, spiritual experience. And they wanted more. They wanted their own self-expression. When a person is intoxicated, they're thinking about themselves. They're not thinking about anyone else. They wanted to push aside Moshe and Aaron. They were Mora Halachim in front of their Rebbes. They decided what to do. Who are you to tell me how to do it? So we have observance, which can sometimes tragically be devoid of spirituality. We have spirituality, which at times, again, tragically, with the best of motives, can be devoid of observance. And it's when we have observance together with spirituality, that is how we have what we would call religious. Because religion is giving parameters, it's giving a roadmap of how to express that spirituality in a way that it actually will connect you to the Creator, following the parameters, the roadmap. God could tell me that this is something that will increase a connection, and this is something that will inhibit the connection. If we're talking about a connection, I can't set up my own rules. I'm in a relationship. Well, I think this will improve the relationship, and I think this will hurt the relationship. Great. If I don't confer with the other party, chances are I'm not going to have a relationship, because I can't decide that on my own. Then it's all about me, but a relationship is one with the other. And that was they got swept away in this unbridled spirituality without it being grounded properly. So that's how I see the lineup. Observance, not necessarily spiritual. Spiritual, not necessarily observant. Spiritual and observant, that is the way that a person is truly religious. And very often we have situations. How can a religious person do this or do that? And the truth is, a religious person can't. It might be a person who presents as religious. It might be a person who presents as who dresses, who presents in such a way, but a truly religious person does not, would not. That doesn't mean that you can't have a spiritual observant person who stumbles. We all stumble. Everyone stumbles. Sheva yipol tzadik v'kam. 7 times that tzaddik stumbles and gets up. But if a person is consistently not grappling and consistently doing things that are horrific, the person might be observant. The person might be spiritual. The person might present as observant, might present as spiritual, but they're not religious. Religious is that fusion of the two. And it's a constant struggle. It's a constant battle that a person has. Yes, Ora, sorry for cutting you off before.
Oh no, I'm sorry for cutting into your thoughts. A few things. I feel very touched by this subject personally because I do struggle with being religious in the sense that I believe religious is versus what the Torah says how to be religious. So it really hits home. But I want to say this about Nadav and Avihu. The angle that I see this is that, you know, the presence of God is perfection. You cannot add to it by bringing more. And I think that is also expressed with that they overstep their boundaries by wanting to add to something that is the ultimate.
Yeah. I saw pointed out on aleph-beta.org, which again I recommend everybody to wonderful Torah there, right? Nadav. Let's look at the names. Nadav. What does Nadav mean? Nadav means an offering, a free will offering, right? A nidava is a donation, right? And that's what he wanted to do, as you're saying, Ora. He wanted to be Nodav. And there are ways that we can be Nodav, but there are ways to be Nodav that we can bring, right? You know, it's not just this is what you have to do, but if a person wants to do more, that person can do more, but there are ways to do more. And this was an unbridled Nadav, Nidava. And look at the other name, Avihu. Nadav and Avihu. What does Avihu mean? Avihu. He is my Av. He is my father. What do we say? Avinu Malkeinu. We have that mixture, that combination of a father and a melech. There's Avat Hashem and there's Yirat Hashem. Right? And we need, there's the love of God, and there needs to be the awe of God. The awe means I realize I'm out of my league over here. You know, I could love someone, right? That's almost like equals. I love this person. But there's also that awe. Right? Another point, another explanation is that they weren't wearing their proper big day kahuna, their proper garments of the Kohanim. Again, what does that speak to? A certain familiarity, a certain breaking of the boundaries, a certain lack of awe.
Yeah, casual, being casual about it.
Avihu, it's my dad. It's my dad. Avihu, yeah. Avinu Malkeinu, our father, our king. And it was this casualness, this sense of, yeah, let me do it. Let me do it my way.
Rabbi, I have another thought here about I hope I'm not cutting into you again. The thought is that you're saying that spirituality is where you follow the rules, not only being in connection with spirit. And I think the word here is Jewish because these are rules that make us the Jewish people.
Yeah.
So you can be spiritual, but then you're not a Jew if you're not following exactly or somewhat the rules.
Then yes, it is to a certain degree misguided spirituality. Now, non-Jews could also be spiritual. They have their Sheva mitzvot, their 7 Noahide laws, right? That's how they create their spirituality, right? But for the Jewish people, it is through the Torah, through the Taryag mitzvot. That is the roadmap for our spirituality. And as I was talking now, it struck me a question that I had, right? The Parsha goes through. So we finish then with their death on page 592. We have Aaron's reaction of acceptance of silence on page 594. And then on page 596, we jump into kashrut, right? Chapter 11, Spirit of Israel saying, these are the creatures they may eat among the animals that are upon the earth, split hoof, right? Choose its cud, right? And for the rest of the parsha, we're discussing the laws of kashrut. What's the connection? According to what we're saying now, is a very, very powerful connection. Right? You're living in the world. You and I, we're not going into this Mishkan, but we're living in the world. We're living in God's worlds. Boundaries. Recognize the boundaries. And we have many, many boundaries. But if their overstepping was reminiscent of Gan Eden, then the boundaries that we're going, the Garden of Eden, and the boundaries that we're going to reiterate now are the eating boundaries. And that's why the rest of the Parsha is, these are the animals, these are the fish, these are the fowl, right? These are the insects. Yes, we're allowed to eat grasshoppers. We don't have certain ones. We don't have the Masorah, the tradition. Yemenites do have the tradition that certain grasshoppers are kosher. To us, the whole idea seems, so far from it, right? But, right? And that's what the rest of the Parsha is all about, the boundaries. Okay,
Rabbi?
yes.
Rabbi? So getting back to this free will idea, I had asked the question even before you
Roger, your voice has gotten a lot higher all of a sudden. Yes.
So some discussion had already occurred regarding free will offerings that they're okay. In this case, couldn't, as you say, Nadav and Avihu have been spiritually charged innocently enough, thinking they were bringing a free will offering and not in an alien way, to bring a fire incense free will offering, and they thought they were being innocent, and I can understand they need to be shown, but it's so inconsistent. God forbid that I question Hashem, but Hava and Adam were only spiritually disconnected. They were only sent out of the Garden of Eden. They weren't taken. Their lives weren't taken. Aaron with the Hetag Egel was rebuked, but still got to keep the position of Kohen Gadol. This seems totally, if you're going to,
I hear what you're saying, Janet.
it's
Let me
totally
just say, I hear what you're saying,
that's a
Janet.
blueprint for behavior
Janet,
for us.
I hear what you're saying. First of
Every
all, Adam
year
and
it
Eve,
still gets me.
I'm sorry?
Every year I still don't get the inconsistency, and it gets me.
We go through this every year. We'll try again. And then we'll try again next year, Janet. So first of all, Adam and Eve, their lives were taken. They were not supposed to die. As a result of that, they hit mortality. Okay? They hit mortality. Aaron was at a time of great confusion that was taking place. This was at this pivotal point of Jewish history, of the world. Now we have the Mishkan, God's presence. We had Shamayim and we had Aretz. And Avram was the first one to start bringing God from the heavens down into the earth. And now we have the actual fulfillment, the culmination of that. God's presence is here on earth. This is ground zero. This is the nerve center. This is the Kodesh Kadashim. You can't go into the Kodesh Kadashim and do your own thing and emerge. You've entered into a different realm. Now, how is God judging them? Moshe said to Aaron, we didn't see this, Moshe said to Aaron, Bikrovai Ekadesh. I thought that we were the most holy ones. Now I see they're the most holy ones. How they're going to be judged in heaven? God in heaven, the merciful, loving God in heaven, will decide that. Moshe called them Kedoshim. But they cannot continue over here. We couldn't have them, my understanding, we couldn't have them walking around saying, oh, those are the guys who decided to do a freestyle in the Holy of Holies. Wow. I wonder what freestyle I can do in the Holy of Holies. Again, how they're judged, that the merciful God in heaven judges them. I'm sure they're the highest place of Gan Eden. But they cannot continue over here. By their death, that created a Kiddush Hashem. Had they continued on, that would have been a Chilul Hashem. Until next year, Janet.
Thank you, Rabbi.
That's the 2021 installment on our ongoing discussion. Okay, my friends.
Thank
We'll
you.
pull it over here. Be well, everybody. Shavua
Thank you.
Tov, Shavua Tov. Good to see everybody again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Be well, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you all. Have a great week.
Great week.
Thank you.